In Kotlin, we use the return keyword with functions that have a block body and not with functions that have an expression body, right? Well, that's the way it used to work, but a lot of Kotlin developers missed this. There was a change that was made in Kotlin 2.2.20, which became the default behavior in 2.3, and that change is that you can now use the return keyword in functions that have an expression body. And why would this actually be helpful? Well, let's find out. Just to demonstrate that this actually works, here is a simple function with an expression body. Now, it's entirely possible to just put the return keyword directly before the result expression like this, as long as we also explicitly specify the return type of the function. So what you see here now is completely valid and also completely pointless. Well, the real value of this feature is the ability to short circuit out of an expression. So rather than putting the return keyword before the expression, I'm talking about putting it in the middle of that expression. So let's look at an example that will make a little bit more sense. On the left-hand side, we've got a few models here that represent a user, including a registered user for those cases where the user has signed in, and a guest user for those anonymous sessions where the user hasn't signed in. I've also got this simple user lookup object where we're just kind of simulating a database with a small in-memory map. We've got this find function that uses the provided ID to find a user in that map. And if the argument is null, it simply returns the guest user. And keep in mind that if the user isn't found in this map, this expression with the indexed access operator is going to evaluate to null. And we can run this code over here on the right, and we'll see welcome messages print out for both a registered user and a guest, and we get a special message if the user was not found. Let's rework this find function so that it uses the return keyword here instead. So instead of this when expression, we can just collapse this down to just this. And this has the same effect as it had previously. When the ID is null, then the guest object is returned, and when the user is found, then that user object is returned, and when the user isn't found, then it returns null. So this does the same thing, but it's certainly more concise because the return here lets us short circuit out of this expression and return the guest object right away. So for certain cases, this will result in more concise code that's still pretty easy to read. But there's another reason why I think this change is actually even strategic for the future of the language. So far, many Kotlin developers have simply followed the Java approach of throwing an exception when something goes wrong at runtime. But all that's going to change with the introduction of what the Kotlin team calls rich errors. Now, Michael, the lead language designer for Kotlin, he did a talk about this at last year's KotlinConf, and I'll link to that talk in the description here so that you can get all of the details. But the main idea is that our functions will be able to return union types of the primary result type and any error types. In order for Kotlin developers to easily migrate from throwing exceptions to returning errors, we're going to need to be able to return errors from anywhere that we've already been able to throw exceptions. So for example, in this code, we've inlined the argument validation here. So if the argument for the rating parameter is outside of the range of 1 to 5, then we throw this rating validation exception. Well, in order to seamlessly migrate to returning errors instead, we would need to be able to return from the same point at which we're currently throwing. In the future, the return type in this case would actually look something like this. But since we don't have rich errors yet, and since returns in expression bodies require that we explicitly specify the type, I'll just set this return type to any just to get this to compile. If Kotlin didn't support the return keyword inside expression bodies, then this migration would have required more invasive changes to the code of this function. We would have needed to restructure this to use maybe like a takeif along with a scope function and an Elvis operator, just to get the same behavior in an expression body. Or we would simply need to convert this to use a block body. But because we can now use the return keyword in an expression body, the update was very simple. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it'd be a fair argument to say that the code we're looking at here isn't the easiest to read. and it probably would be better written with a block body. But still, with Kotlin moving toward rich errors, I do think that it's a smart move to support return everywhere that throw has been supported so far. So there you go, explicit returns in expression bodies. Seems like a small update, and when I first saw it, I wasn't really sure why we would need it. But now that I've played with it a little bit more, I can definitely see some benefits, both for readability in some situations and for supporting rich errors in the future. Hey, if you like Kotlin as much as I do, you can join tons of other Kotlin developers who have signed up for my email newsletter, and that way you can keep up with all of my articles and videos and other fun projects that I've got up my sleeve. You can do that at newsletter.typealias.com. There's a link for that in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.